Chapter 1821, The Two Bishops. Zhang Yi said indifferently, as a country with mid to high power in Europe, Rome has not faced many challenges in their region. The Juno family of three is the most powerful trio in all of Rome. The abilities of the three can be used in combination, and even against a white bishop with a 30,000 ability index, they have a fighting chance. An overly comfortable environment can create an illusion and weaken one's awareness of danger. One can even forget the need to guard against death. Despite his words, Zhang Yi still had his hands propped up on his chin, a grave look on his face. But even so, being able to finish them off so quickly. The strength of this demon god Jia is a bit scary. Deng Shintong, however, said, that may not be the case. Perhaps the demon god Jia's abilities just happened to be able to restrain the Juno family, which is why the battle ended so quickly. The ability to restrain is an extremely crucial factor in mutant combat. Supernatural powers, Zhang Yi softly uttered these two words. The fighting style of the demon god mecha is very simple and crude. In close combat, they rely on their indestructible bodies, which give them close combat strength that is not inferior to that of mutants with enhancements. In long-range combat, they rely on technological weapons. Their attack methods may seem simple, but they are in fact the purest form of energy release, and they are also easy to mass-produce. Their defenses are even higher-level energy barriers. Just these things alone have already made dealing with them a headache. But if on top of that they also have supernatural powers that we can't figure out, then they will become extremely dangerous at critical moments in battle. Deng Shintong let out a cold breath. That sounds a bit scary. What if they manage to fight their way into Samaran City? Zhang Yi tilted his head to the side. This is exactly what I can't figure out. Oh? Why is that? Deng Shintong looked at Zhang Yi, wanting to hear what kind of crazy idea he had. Zhang Yi said, if the goal of mechanical civilization is to eliminate us humans, then from the very beginning, they only needed to muster a fraction of their strength. Even if only 5 demon god machines were deployed, they could easily wipe out the entire Fremons. Including the mutants from the Pantheon, they were unable to stop their killing spree. But they didn't do that. Instead, they acted as if they didn't care about humans. But now, why have they suddenly started acting so obviously again? It's almost as if... Deng Shintong continued his sentence, it's almost as if they're deliberately trying to attract our attention. The two of them looked at each other and laughed. Zhang Yi said, this is what I don't understand the most. He looked up at the sky, and above the clouds there were huge polyhedrons floating, as if they were the eyes of the gods observing the world. There are so many mysteries. These underground civilizations have almost no connection with each other. It's fine if we're dealing with the same old carbon-based life forms. But now that even machines have appeared, it's really getting on my nerves. Zhang Yi rubbed his temples. Forget it, let's just keep an eye on things. At that moment, a lazy voice came from behind him. To put it bluntly, we're still not strong enough. Zhang Yi didn't need to turn around to know who was coming. It was really hard to sneak up on a bishop-level mutant with space abilities without being noticed. Ling walked over with small, broken steps, her hands behind her head as she walked lazily. Deng Shintong looked back at her and smiled tenderly. Miss Ling, do you have any new information? Ling beamed at the two of them and said, for the time being, no. I just came to see what kind of information I could get out of you two in exchange for some money. She formed a circle with her thumb and forefinger, palm up, making a money gesture, looking greedy. Deng Shintong helplessly patted his head. I've told you before. After this mission is over, you can come back to the mainland with us. The big boss is generous, and he won't treat you badly. Deng Shintong patted Zhang Yi on the shoulder. Don't you agree? Zhang Yi was indeed very interested in Ling. His Tianhai fortress was being rebuilt, and in the future he wanted to form an influence of his own. And in this new influence, a large number of outstanding talents were needed. Of course he would not reject someone like Ling, not to mention that Ling had also passed Yang Xinxin's test, which confirmed that she had no particular purpose in appearing by his side. It seemed that it was just an infernal affair of exchanging information for money. However, Zhang Yi still felt that she was somewhat mysterious, because the information she was able to obtain had a very high level of confidentiality. Well, let's just say that she was too good. Ling, what do you think about Fremons and mechanical civilization? I mean, where do you think things will go from here? Zhang Yi asked with a faint smile. Huh? Me? Ling pointed at her face in surprise, then said with a smile, I didn't think the famous Chaos would also ask me for advice. I'm really flattered. But then she straightened up, thought for a while, and said, I feel very strange. The behavior of those mechanical life forms reveals a strange feeling. Zhang Yi nodded, he felt the same way. It's almost like they're putting on a show, or a sacrificial ritual or something, she muttered, her tone a little uncertain, as if she were just rambling. But these words sent a shockwave through Zhang Yi's heart, as if a bolt of thunder had passed through his mind. Performance, ritual? Can one really think about things from this perspective? Don't tell me, don't tell me. I've never thought of it that way before. Zhang Yi's mind really couldn't think of such things. He frowned and pondered for a long time before looking up and asking in return, well, rituals always have a goal. What is their goal? Ling smiled without saying a word, but just looked up and gazed at the sky. Zhang Yi and Deng Shintong followed her gaze to the sky, and in an instant they understood what Ling meant. Everything that mechanical civilization does is for the observers in the sky. Is that what she meant? A chaotic line in Zhang Yi's mind slowly began to be sorted out, as if finding a thread from a tangled ball of wool and then pulling it out to form a complete strand. Zhang Yi suddenly remembered that when the first incident occurred in Fremons, they had planned to come over to provide support. However, they were interrupted by an event, and that was the period when these polyhedrons appeared in the sky. Even the mechanical civilization in Fremons ground to a halt and temporarily ceased its activities. Zhang Yi had once doubted whether or not there was a connection between the sudden appearance of observers in the sky and the mechanical civilization in Fremons. Later, during the campaign against the demon god Gui, he found the ruins deep in the earth. Combining what has been learned so far, the suspicion in Zhang Yi's heart gradually became real. Zhang Yi touched his chin and began to speak his mind. The observer in the sky and the mechanical civilization on the ground are not one civilization. If my guess is correct, the observer civilization is a higher level of existence. The mechanical civilization digs all over the land of Fremons in order to find the observer civilization. Or rather, to find something to sacrifice to the observer civilization. However, as can be seen from the fact that the mechanical civilization stopped acting when the observer's probe appeared before, there is no communication between the two, and the mechanical civilization is not a vassal of the observer civilization. Therefore, it is unclear what the purpose of the mechanical civilization in searching for the observer civilization is. Common sense dictates that a lower-level civilization would not dare to contact a higher-level civilization, as it would risk being destroyed. Although I don't understand the purpose of the mechanical civilization, they must have had a reason to do so if they chose to take the risk. It's just that after such a long time of digging, they still haven't found what they were looking for. Then the situation changed. Zhang Yi looked at Deng Shintong and Ling Ling's face was aloof and amused, while Deng Shintong nodded in agreement with Zhang Yi's reasoning. Zhang Yi continued, that change was the emergence of humans. I think at first the mechanical civilization didn't care about our existence at all, so they didn't try to wipe out all the humans in Fremons. And after they went to war with us, the observer civilization gave feedback. Deng Shintong continued, isn't it a bit like watching a gladiatorial battle? The slaughter of two different races will arouse the interest of a superior civilization. It's like how humans will put all kinds of different creatures in a sealed box and let them fight each other. Just for their own amusement. After Zhang Yi analyzed it this way, things became reasonable. The 369 observer detectors in the sky are the prying of a superior civilization on a lower civilization. However, there was still one thing Zhang Yi had not figured out. That was the lost relics he had found from beneath the earth after his battle with demon god Gui. Was it the place where the mechanical civilization once existed? Zhang Yi felt like he had fallen into a huge whirlpool. Even though he was now strong, he was just a small creature with only a little self-preservation ability in this huge whirlpool. The answer to everything may not be revealed until the end of this battle. Zhang Yi stood up and went looking for Lu Karen. At the moment, he desperately wanted Lu Karen and Yang Xinxin to decipher everything they had obtained from the Black House. As long as they knew which civilization the Black House belonged to, they would probably be able to figure out why everything that had happened in Fremons had happened. Galana State. The Knights of the Round Table had a total of 14 members, all of whom were present. For this battle, King Arthur Pendragon himself chose the target, which was Demon God Bing, the third in rank. Zhang Yi had chosen Demon God Ding, so King Arthur felt that he must not be outdone by Zhang Yi, so he directly chose Demon God Bing, which was theoretically more difficult than his task. King Arthur and Merlin led the team, followed by the 12 Knights of the Round Table. After Green Knight Bowser was killed in battle, the replacement was Doom Knight, Geraint. The Knights of the Round Table were not lacking in elite troops. As long as King Arthur and the court magician Merlin were there, this team would always be a world-class team of mutants. So far, they were also the only team that had successfully returned from raiding the ruins of an ancient civilization on their own. Once they arrived on the battlefield, they immediately faced tens of thousands of mechanical life forms. Among them were 5 combat-type super-large mechanical life forms, whose bodies, like those of mountains, faced them directly, and whose energy furnaces had already begun to converge, preparing to unleash a terrifying attack. King Arthur stood in front of everyone with his hands holding the knight's greatsword, and a composed smile appeared on his face as he looked at this massive army. It's been a long time since we've experienced such a magnificent war, hasn't it? I can probably imagine how our ancestors galloped across the battlefield in ancient times. Merlin, dressed in a white combat uniform, said beside him, "Let's go deal with Demon God Bing first." "I'll go with you." King Arthur's smile grew even wider. "No, you go with them and deal with the other mechanical life forms. As for that demon god, leave it to me." Lancelot, the first knight and deputy captain, said from the side, somewhat unconvinced, "Those guys, we're enough to handle them." King Arthur said, "Lancelot, you do have the strength to fight on the battlefield. But don't forget, you are the deputy captain of the Knights of the Round Table. You not only have to think about yourself, but also fight side by side with your subordinates." What he meant was that Lancelot's personal abilities were not enough to protect the other members of the Knights of the Round Table. Lancelot was suddenly speechless. After returning from the underground Nash Kingdom in the southwest region, his strength had been steadily increasing with the help of the resources he obtained. Although it was far less than the speed of Zhang Yi's improvement, his personal ability index had reached 23,000 points. It was top-notch in the world, not in the first echelon, but close behind. However, in the presence of the person in front of him, he still did not dare to be presumptuous and could only obediently accept his orders. Merlin smiled and looked at King Arthur. "No need to work so hard. If we join forces, we can win faster. As the King of Knights, I allow him to fight me in a fair one-on-one duel." King Arthur refused Merlin's kind offer. He knew that Zhang Yi had definitely defeated Demon God Gui with his own strength. Zhang Yi's team was not as strong as his elite Knights of the Round Table. He had a desire to compete with Zhang Yi in his heart, perhaps related to Bowser, and of course not unrelated to his conversation with the pupil organization. Merlin sighed with a helpless smile. "Okay, my respected king." In the battlefield, mechanical life forms filled the ground densely. There were tens of thousands of them, each one huge in size, the smallest comparable to a human truck. Such a scene was enough to make one's scalp tingle, and even give rise to the thought of being unable to overcome one's despair. But the people opposite them were the Knights of the Round Table, the strongest in Britannia. On the back of a super-large mechanical life form, a black demon god sat on a raised metal bar, coldly watching the distant enemy. Demon God Bing. He was considered to be the one among the many demon gods that looked more human. He wore a hideous demon mask on his head. No, as a cyborg, that wasn't his mask, but his head was just shaped that way. Behind him grew two long tails of red and black, and apart from that he was almost no different from a human. A huge long sword was stuck in his back. The blade was not curved, but straight, with a single edge, and studded with red energy crystals. "Destroy them," Demon God Bing gave the battle order to all the mechanical life forms. In an instant, the energy cannons that had long since gathered energy in the tens of thousands of mechanical life forms blasted forward. The whole world brightened up, eliminating the cold, grayish-white tone of the end of the world. Merlin patted King Arthur on the shoulder with his left hand, then took 2 steps back and said with a smile, "Go ahead. Leave the other guys to us." After saying this, he held his hands together in an imaginary grip at the lower right of his body, and a sword that was no different from the Excalibur in King Arthur's hands was condensed from his supernatural powers. King Arthur bent his legs slightly, then leaped up suddenly, and in an instant his figure disappeared from the spot like lightning. Merlin led the 12 members of the Knights of the Round Table, swiftly avoiding the barrage of energy cannons as they dashed towards the battlefield. "Excalibur!" Merlin shouted, and then slashed the sword at the mechanical legion in front of them. A surging supernatural power exploded from the blade, the light of the sword tearing through the barrage of bullets from the mechanical life forms and enveloping a large number of them directly in front. Their bodies were enveloped by the powerful sword light, and the white sword light covered everything around it. Soon, only a huge crack remained on the ground, and all the mechanical life forms in this area were crushed. Merlin was beaming with joy. "I've wanted to try this move for a long time." Merlin's strike ripped a crack in the mechanical legion. Even Lancelot would be jealous at this powerful display. The second in command of the Knights of the Round Table was not Lancelot, but the court magician Merlin. He was a powerful figure second only to King Arthur. No, strictly speaking, he did not desire to be king, but rather preferred to act as an assistant, watching as King Arthur ascended to the throne step by step. He did not like to show off, but Lancelot even felt that if Merlin and King Arthur were to duel, the outcome would be hard to predict. Yes, there are 2 bishops among the members of the Knights of the Round Table. The other members of the Knights of the Round Table are not far behind, and instantly charge into the battlefield in battle formation. Lancelot, shield in his left hand and knight longsword in his right, is enveloped in the dark fallen sky ember flames. He charges left and right among the mechanical life forms, and his violent power instantly cuts those mechanical life forms to pieces. King Arthur used the flight capabilities of his combat suit to arrive directly in front of Demon God Bing. Demon God Bing looked up at him with interest. From this human, he sensed a hint of threat, stemming from the powerful energy reaction that faintly emanated from within him. 2 mechanical life forms blocked the way in front of Demon God Bing, one a war tank-like super-large mechanical life form, and the other a tower crane-like mass with 6 huge mechanical arms. They simultaneously opened their defensive force fields, and then the muzzles belched out red energy cannons. These super-large mechanical life forms were specially developed for combat. If they were to be used in times of peace, either of them would be able to crush several human legions. The large-caliber energy cannons alone could easily pierce a small city. But in the face of all this, King Arthur simply gave a faint smile in the air. His gaze was fixed on the demon god Bing ahead of him, and he didn't even spare a glance at the 2 super-large mechanical life forms. Then he raised his hands high, holding aloft the knightly battle sword that symbolized kingship. "Merlin, what you just imitated doesn't even come close to being similar," King Arthur said with a smile, and in the communication channel, Merlin just chuckled in response. King Arthur's sword slashed down, and sword light exploded from the tip of the sword. Powerful supernatural energy poured into the long sword from both hands, and then it was released. It looked like an unadorned move, but when used by a bishop-level mutant, the power that exploded out was truly shocking. Wherever the sword light passes, everything pales in comparison, including the 2 oversized mechanical life forms. Their attacks are devoured, their defensive force fields shattered, and their bodies also crumble under this blow. The broken steel sword, the king's sword, passes through, conquering everything in its path, unstoppable. Even the most powerful defenses can be broken. Demon God Bing's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw the sword. He stood up from the body of the oversized mechanical life form and slowly drew the straight sword, which was more than half his body length, from behind his right hand. He leapt into the air, and a strong fighting spirit burst forth from the source that had been dormant for countless years. King Arthur smiled and raised his sword to cleave the enemy before him. Clang! The knight's two-handed sword collided with Demon God Bing's straight sword, and the terrifying energy instantly swept in all directions, engulfing everything around it. When the battle ended, 2 days and 2 nights had passed. The battlefield was desolate, with the remains of mechanical life forms everywhere. The members of the Knights of the Round Table were either injured or slightly disheveled, but none had been killed. Merlin, the court magician, stepped forward. King Arthur's sword had finally slashed off the head of Demon God Bing. His hands, which had become a little weak, supported the long sword, and he leaned on it to keep himself from falling. However, during the past 2 days of fighting, he had almost used up all his strength. No one had expected the battle to last so long, and even less had they expected that Demon God Bing would have such powerful supernatural abilities. It was a supernatural ability similar to the human enhancement system, which greatly enhanced his combat effectiveness, made his straight sword faster and more ferocious, and gave his body an impenetrable defensive capability. King Arthur had a very difficult time fighting, and he almost died on the battlefield. However, the advantage brought by the presence of 2 mutants of the White Bishop level was too great. Although they were only spectating, the psychological impact they had could have a great effect in a duel between experts. After 2 days and nights, King Arthur, in a near-collapse state, slashed the energy-exhausted Demon God Bing. This battle was devoid of any gimmicks, and was purely a clash of swords, a competition of strength, skill, and endurance. In the end, King Arthur won the battle.